Marcus Chen had nothing left to lose when he bought the salvage rights to Station Keth 7 for 3,000 credits. His ex-wife had taken the house, his former business partner had taken the company, and the bank had taken everything else. All he wanted was a quiet place to disappear and maybe scrape together enough salvage to buy a one-way ticket to the Outer Rim colonies. The abandoned alien station hung in the shadow of a dead moon, its twisted metal spires reaching out like the fingers of a drowning giant. According to the Galactic Salvage Authority, the Kethrani had evacuated it 60 years ago during their civil war and never returned. Perfect for a man who wanted to be forgotten. Marcus guided his beat-up cargo hauler through the docking bay's atmospheric barrier. The artificial gravity kicked in as soon as he crossed the threshold, and his boots hit the deck plates with a hollow thud that echoed through the cavernous space. Emergency lighting cast everything in a dim red glow, and the air tasted stale despite the life support system still functioning. He shouldered his equipment pack and activated his portable scanner. The readings showed breathable atmosphere throughout most of the station, though the temperature ran cold. Marcus pulled his jacket tighter and stepped deeper into the alien structure. The Kethrani built everything on a scale that made humans feel like children. The corridors stretched 15 feet high, with smooth walls that curved upward like the inside of enormous tubes. Strange symbols glowed faintly along the ceiling. Some kind of emergency lighting system that had kept running for decades without maintenance. Marcus had studied Kethrani architecture before coming here. They were a tall, graceful species, with 4 arms and a natural affinity for engineering that made human technology look primitive. Their ships could cross the galaxy in weeks, while human vessels took months. Their cities floated in the clouds of gas giants. Their space stations could house millions and run themselves for centuries. So why had they abandoned this one? The first few levels yielded nothing interesting. Empty living quarters with furniture sized for beings twice his height. Communal areas where alien families had once gathered. Storage rooms picked clean by previous salvagers. Marcus found a few valuable components that earlier scavengers had missed, but nothing that would make him rich. It was on the 4th level down that he found the sealed section. The corridor ended at a massive circular door covered in warning symbols. Marcus didn't read Kethrani script, but he recognized caution markers when he saw them. Red symbols pulsed slowly around the door's perimeter, and his scanner detected high-energy readings from beyond the barrier. Most salvagers would have turned around. The first rule of the business was never open anything that previous owners had deliberately sealed. But Marcus had run out of options, and good sense years ago. He pulled out his plasma cutter and got to work on the locking mechanism. The door's security system had degraded over the decades. What should have taken hours of careful work took Marcus only 30 minutes to bypass. The massive portal groaned as it split along its center line and retracted into the walls. A wave of warm, humid air rushed out, carrying scents that didn't belong on an abandoned station. Growing things. Living things. Marcus stepped through the doorway and stopped dead in his tracks. The sealed section wasn't empty. It was a garden. Impossible gardens stretched out before him under artificial sunlight that felt real against his skin. Trees he didn't recognize reached toward a curved ceiling painted to look like sky. Flowers in colors that had no names bloomed along winding paths. Water trickled through streams that fed small ponds where strange fish darted between floating plants. But that wasn't the shocking part. The shocking part was the children. A group of young Kethrani sat in a clearing ahead. Their tall forms bent over what looked like a lesson. An adult stood before them, gesturing with all 4 arms. As she explained something in their musical language, they all turned toward Marcus when his boots crunched on the gravel path. The adult's hands went to the weapon at her belt. The children scrambled behind her with frightened chirps. Marcus raised his hands slowly, keeping his movements calm and unthreatening. "I'm not here to hurt anyone," he said, knowing they probably didn't understand him. "I'm just a salvager. I thought this place was empty." The adult Kethrani studied him with large, golden eyes. She had the typical height and grace of her species, but her clothes were worn and patched. Her weapon was old, but well-maintained. When she spoke, her voice carried the melodic tones that made Kethrani one of the most beautiful languages in the galaxy. "You speak the human tongue," she said in accented but clear standard. "I am Veltar." You should not be here. Neither should you, Marcus replied. This station was evacuated 60 years ago. Everyone knows that. Veltar's expression grew guarded. Not everyone left. Some had nowhere else to go. The pieces began falling into place. During the Kethrani Civil War, not everyone had chosen a side. Some families had tried to remain neutral, only to find themselves hunted by both factions. Others had been too poor or isolated to join the evacuation fleets. A few might have chosen to stay hidden rather than face an uncertain future in exile. How many of you are there? Marcus asked. Enough, Veltar said, which wasn't really an answer. One of the children tugged at her robes and whispered something urgent. Veltar's posture shifted, becoming more protective. You must leave now. Forget what you have seen here. I can't do that, Marcus said. I bought salvage rights to this station. Legally, I own everything here. Your laws do not apply to us. Actually, they do. This is neutral space under Galactic Trade Authority jurisdiction. But that's not why I can't leave. Veltar tilted her head in confusion. Then why? Marcus looked around at the impossible garden. At the frightened children. At this woman who had somehow kept her people alive in secret for 6 decades. He thought about his empty life, his failed marriage, his string of poor decisions that had led him to this desperate gambit. Because you're going to die if you stay here, he said, and I know why. The admission hung in the air between them. Veltar's golden eyes narrowed as she studied his face, searching for deception or threat. The children whispered among themselves in their musical language. Explain, she said finally. Marcus pointed upward toward the station's core levels. Your life support systems are failing. I saw the diagnostic readings when I docked. You've got maybe 6 months before cascade failure brings down the whole grid. Your people have done an incredible job keeping this place running. But 60 years of jury rigging can only go so far. We know, Veltar admitted. Our engineers have been working on solutions. But we lack the proper components for full repairs. What you need is a complete system overhaul using modern equipment. That's going to cost millions of credits and require skilled technicians who know both Kethrani and human technology, which we do not have. No, Marcus said, but I might know how to get them. It was a crazy idea, but crazy had become Marcus's specialty. The Galactic Trade Authority had programs for refugee assistance, especially for isolated populations discovered in unusual circumstances. If he could document the situation properly and present it through the right channels, he might be able to secure emergency humanitarian aid. But it would mean giving up his salvage claim. It would mean abandoning his plan to disappear and start over somewhere else. It would mean getting involved in other people's problems when his own life was already a disaster. Veltar watched him carefully as these thoughts played across his face. Why would you help us? What do you gain? That was the question, wasn't it? Marcus looked around at the garden again. At the careful way these people had preserved beauty and life in the middle of an abandoned hulk floating in space. They could have simply survived, but instead they had chosen to build something worth preserving. Maybe I've spent too long taking things apart, he said finally. Maybe it's time I tried to build something for a change. The children had crept closer during their conversation, their natural curiosity overcoming their fear. One of them, a young female with bright purple markings on her arms, stepped forward and said something in Kethrani. Veltar translated with a small smile. She asks if you are a guardian spirit sent to help us. In our old stories, guardians often appear in times of great need wearing humble forms. Marcus almost laughed. If he was anybody's idea of a guardian spirit, the universe had a twisted sense of humor. But looking at the hope in the child's golden eyes, he found himself saying, "Tell her I'm just a human who ended up in the right place at the wrong time." Or perhaps, Veltar said thoughtfully, the wrong human in the right place at the right time. As the artificial day cycle dimmed toward evening, Marcus found himself invited to share their meal. The Kethrani had adapted their traditional foods to what they could grow in the garden sections, creating dishes that were alien but somehow comforting. They ate in a communal hall carved from what had once been a storage bay, and Marcus listened to their stories. There were 47 of them left. Families who had refused to abandon their home during the Civil War, believing that neutrality would protect them. Engineers who had chosen to stay behind and maintain the station rather than flee. Children who had been born here and knew no other world. They had survived by becoming invisible. When other salvagers came, they sealed themselves into the garden sections and waited for the intruders to leave. They grew their own food, recycled their water, and maintained their life support systems with increasing difficulty as components wore out. "We are the last of our kind on this station," explained Korth, the chief engineer. "When we are gone, a piece of Kethrani history dies with us." "Not if I can help it," Marcus said. That night, sleeping in a guest room that had been hastily prepared for his unexpected human proportions, Marcus stared at the ceiling and wondered what he had gotten himself into. Tomorrow he would have to start making calls, reaching out to contacts he hadn't spoken to in years, pulling favors he wasn't sure he had earned. But for the first time since his world had fallen apart, he had found something worth fighting for. Something worth fixing instead of tearing down. As he drifted off to sleep, he could hear the distant sound of children laughing in the gardens, and he knew he had made the right choice, even if it was about to make his life infinitely more complicated. Marcus spent 3 days learning how to navigate Galactic Trade Authority bureaucracy from a cargo hold that smelled of recycled air and desperation. His first dozen calls went nowhere. Mid-level officials transferred him to other departments, who transferred him to automated systems, who transferred him back to the beginning of an endless loop. "Refugee status requires documentation of persecution," explained Administrator Thorne during what felt like his 100th conversation. "Do you have evidence that these individuals were specifically targeted during the Kethrani Civil War?" Marcus rubbed his temples. "They've been hiding on an abandoned station for 60 years. I'd say that counts as evidence." Hiding from what, exactly? Without proof of persecution, they could simply be illegal squatters. They're families with children who've lived there their entire lives. How is that illegal squatting? Station ownership reverted to the Galactic Salvage Authority when the Kethrani government fell. Anyone remaining without proper documentation is technically trespassing. The conversation ended like all the others, with promises to review his case and requests for documentation that didn't exist. Marcus threw his communicator across the cargo hold and watched it bounce off the bulkhead. Veltar found him there 20 minutes later, staring at the dented device. She moved with the fluid grace typical of her species, but Marcus had learned to read the tension in her movements. She was worried. "No success with your authorities?" she asked. "They want proof you were persecuted. They want documentation of your original legal status. They want records that were destroyed when your homeworld burned." Marcus picked up the communicator and checked for damage. "They want everything except to actually help." Veltar settled beside him with a soft rustle of fabric. Her people didn't use chairs built for human proportions, so she had learned to fold her long limbs in ways that looked uncomfortable but apparently weren't. "Perhaps it is better this way," she said quietly. "We have survived hidden for 60 years. We can continue." "No, you can't." Marcus turned to face her. "Your life support is failing faster than Korth estimated. I ran my own diagnostics yesterday. You've got 4 months. Maybe 3 if you hit cascade failure early." The admission settled between them like a weight. Veltar's golden eyes reflected the dim lighting of the cargo hold, and for a moment Marcus saw past her dignified composure to the fear underneath. "Then we will find another way," she said. "We always have. There is no other way. Not this time. You need components that cost more than my entire salvage operation is worth. And installation that requires specialists in both Kethrani and human technology. Without official assistance, you're looking at certain death. And with official assistance? What then? Your people relocate us to some refugee camp where we spend the rest of our lives dependent on charity? Where our children grow up with no knowledge of their heritage? Marcus didn't have a good answer for that. The refugee camps he'd seen were grim places where hope went to die slowly. Maybe there's a third option. Such as? I don't know yet, but I'm not giving up. That evening, Marcus joined the community for their daily meal in the converted storage bay. The Kathrani had arranged seating in concentric circles around a central area where speakers shared news, stories, or important announcements. Tonight, Veltar addressed the gathering. She explained Marcus's efforts to secure official aid and the difficulties they had encountered. Her voice remained calm and measured, but the assembled families grew increasingly agitated. Some demanded to know why they should trust a human at all. Others argued for immediate evacuation, regardless of the consequences. A few suggested they should disappear deeper into the station's unused sections and wait for Marcus to give up and leave. Korth, the chief engineer, stood to speak. His forearms gestured emphatically as he laid out their technical situation in stark terms. Life support degradation had accelerated beyond their ability to patch and repair. They had perhaps 90 days before the cascade failure made the station uninhabitable. "We face a choice," he concluded. "Accept help from this human and risk exposure to hostile authorities, or remain hidden and face certain death." The debate continued for hours. Marcus listened to the musical flow of Kathrani's speech, understanding nothing but sensing the emotions underneath. Fear, anger, hope, and desperation mixed together in voices that rose and fell like waves. Finally, the young female who had called him a guardian spirit stood up. Her name was Senna, and despite her youth, her words carried weight among the families. She spoke directly to Marcus in carefully practiced standard. "My grandmother tells stories of the old days, before the war came to our world. She says humans and Kathrani once worked together building the first stations in this sector. She says humans see problems differently than we do, sometimes finding solutions where we see only obstacles." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "I do not know if you are a guardian spirit or simply a lost human who found us by accident. But you have chosen to help when you could have taken profit instead. That choice honors the memory of the cooperation my grandmother remembers." The gathering fell silent. Finally, an elder named Varix spoke for the families. "We will trust the human Marcus, but only so far. If his authorities threaten our children or our way of life, we will disappear into the deep sections where even he cannot find us." That night, Marcus lay awake planning his next approach. The official channels weren't working, but he had spent 20 years in the salvage business. He knew people who operated in the gray areas between legal and illegal, who could move equipment and personnel without asking too many questions. His first call the next morning was to Yuki Tanaka, a freight hauler who owed him 3 favors from a job in the Centauri system. "Marcus Chen," she said when his call connected. "I heard you finally went completely broke. How's poverty treating you?" "Better than marriage did." "I need a favor, Yuki." "Of course you do. What kind of favor?" "The expensive, dangerous, probably illegal kind." There was a pause. "Those are the only favors worth doing. What do you need?" Marcus explained the situation in general terms. A stranded community on a failing station, the need for life support components and technical expertise, the lack of official options. Yuki listened without interrupting, then asked the obvious question. "What's in it for me? Right now?" "Nothing but the warm feeling of helping people in need." "I don't get warm feelings, Marcus. My ship runs on credits and quantum fuel, not good intentions." "Then how about this? Help me save these people, and I'll transfer my salvage rights to the station. You can sell the scrap for enough to buy a new ship." "How much scrap are we talking about?" Marcus had run the numbers. "A Kathrani heavy station, even gutted, is worth at least 2 million credits in raw materials. Maybe more if you can find buyers for the exotic components." The silence stretched longer this time. "You're serious about this?" Yuki said finally. "Dead serious. And you're willing to give up millions in salvage rights to save a bunch of aliens you just met?" "I am." "Then you really have gone crazy." Another pause. "I'll be there in 6 days, with a cargo hold full of life support components, and 2 of the best Kathrani engineers money can buy." "But Marcus?" "Yeah? If this goes bad, I'm spacing you personally." The next 6 days passed in a blur of activity. Marcus worked with Korth to identify exactly which components they needed for a complete system overhaul. Veltar organized the families to prepare living spaces that could accommodate human workers. The children peppered Marcus with questions about the outside galaxy that their parents couldn't answer. Senna appointed herself his unofficial guide and translator. She had been born on the station and knew every corridor, every maintenance shaft, every hidden passage that the families used to move unseen. Her enthusiasm for everything human was both touching and slightly overwhelming. "Is it true that humans can eat almost anything?" she asked as they walked through a section of gardens devoted to medicinal plants. "Compared to most species, yeah. We're omnivores with pretty robust digestive systems. And you really come from a world covered mostly in water? Earth is about 70% ocean, yes. That sounds terrifying. How do you grow food?" Marcus found himself explaining human agriculture, then human history, then human philosophy. Senna absorbed every word with the intensity of someone discovering that the universe was much larger and stranger than she had imagined. "Do all humans help strangers the way you help us?" she asked during one of these conversations. Marcus considered how to answer that honestly. No. Most humans look out for themselves first. But most humans aren't bad people either. They just get caught up in their own problems and forget to look around at who might need help. "What were your problems before you found us?" That was a harder question. Marcus thought about his failed marriage, his business partner's betrayal, the string of bad decisions that had left him alone and broke. "I forgot how to build things," he said finally. "I got really good at taking things apart, at finding value in broken pieces. But I forgot that sometimes the most valuable thing you can do is put the pieces back together into something better than they were before." When Yuki's ship arrived, it came with complications. The Kethrani engineers she had hired were political refugees from the same civil war that had stranded Veltar's people. They viewed the hidden families with suspicion, calling them collaborators and cowards who had refused to choose sides. "We're not here to help them," announced Kevar, the senior engineer. "We're here to salvage what we can and leave them to face the consequences of their choices." Marcus found himself in the middle of a 60-year-old political argument conducted in rapid Kethrani while critical work went undone. The station's life support systems continued their steady decline toward total failure. It was Veltar who finally broke the deadlock. She called both engineering teams together in the main assembly hall and addressed them in formal, ceremonial Kethrani that even Marcus could recognize as important. She spoke for nearly an hour, her forearms weaving patterns in the air that seemed to give weight to her words. The engineers from Yuki's ship grew increasingly uncomfortable as she continued. And by the end, Kevar was openly weeping. "What did she say?" Marcus asked Senna quietly. "She recited the names of everyone who died in the war. All of them, from both sides. Then she asked if their children should also die because adults cannot set aside old hatreds long enough to fix a broken machine." The work began that afternoon. Human efficiency combined with Kethrani precision to create a repair effort that moved faster than anyone had expected. Yuki's engineers brought modern components that interfaced perfectly with the station's original systems. Korth's team provided detailed knowledge of 6 decades worth of modifications and workarounds. Marcus found himself coordinating between groups who didn't quite trust each other, translating not just language but cultural expectations and work methods. It was exhausting, frustrating, and absolutely necessary, but it was also working. For the first time since arriving at the station, Marcus felt like they might actually pull this off. The families might survive. The children might grow up, and maybe, just maybe, he might find that building something was more satisfying than tearing it down. The cascade failure hit on day 12 of the repair operation, 3 weeks ahead of Korth's worst-case projections. Marcus was in the primary life support control room when the alarm started screaming. Red warning lights flashed across every surface as critical systems began shutting down in sequence. The atmospheric recycling plant went offline first, followed by water purification. Then the primary power grid. "Emergency protocols activated," Korth announced, his voice steady despite the chaos. "All families to secured areas. Engineering teams to station shutdown positions." Through the observation windows, Marcus could see families hurrying through the corridors with practiced efficiency. They had drilled for this moment, but no one had expected it to come while outsiders were aboard the station. Kevar, the refugee engineer, studied the cascading system failures with growing horror. The primary fusion reactor is destabilizing. If it goes critical, the whole station becomes radioactive debris. How long do we have? Marcus asked. Maybe 6 hours before we have to evacuate. 12 before the reactor breach makes the station uninhabitable for centuries. Yuki appeared in the doorway, already suited up for emergency departure. My ship can take maybe 20 people, 30 if we stack them like cargo. But that's it. The math was brutal. 47 Kethrani, plus Marcus and the 4 engineers from Yuki's ship. Over half would have to stay behind and die. There has to be another way, Marcus said. There is, Korth said quietly. Manual shutdown of the fusion reactor, followed by complete system rebuild using emergency protocols, but it would require someone to remain in the reactor compartment during the process. For how long? 3 hours minimum, maybe 4. Kevar shook his head. The radiation exposure would be fatal within the first hour. It's suicide. An uncomfortable silence settled over the control room. Outside, they could hear families singing in the secured areas, traditional Kethrani songs that parents used to calm frightened children. I'll do it, Marcus said. You don't understand, Kevar protested. This isn't heroic sacrifice. It's slow, painful death from radiation poisoning. While you work to save people who will barely remember your name, they'll remember. Veltar's voice came from the doorway. She had entered silently, moving with the fluid grace that her people used in moments of formal ceremony. We remember every act of kindness, every sacrifice, every choice to build rather than destroy. Marcus looked around the control room at faces that reflected fear, determination, and something that might have been hope. Is there any chance someone could survive the exposure? Human radiation tolerance is actually higher than Kethrani, admitted the younger engineer from Yuki's team. And if we could rig some kind of makeshift shielding, Korth's 4 arms moved in quick calculations. Possible. Minimal, but possible. You would need to work very quickly and have considerable luck. I've been living on luck for years, Marcus said. Might as well bet it all on one hand. The next hour passed in frantic preparation. Yuki's engineers rigged a radiation suit with extra shielding made from salvaged hull plating. Korth programmed the shutdown sequence to minimize exposure time. Veltar gathered the families to explain what was happening. Marcus found Senna in the group of children who had been evacuated to the deepest secured area. She was trying to be brave, but tears streaked down her face. Are you really going to die for us? She asked in a small voice. Marcus knelt down to her level, trying to project confidence he didn't feel. I'm going to try very hard not to die. But if something happens to me, I want you to remember something important. What? Humans aren't special because we're brave. Lots of species are brave. We're special because when we see something broken, we can't help trying to fix it. Even when it's dangerous. Even when it's stupid. Even when nobody asked us to. Senna threw her arms around his neck in a fierce hug that nearly knocked him over. I will remember, she whispered. The walk to the reactor compartment felt like the longest journey of Marcus's life. His improvised radiation suit made every movement awkward, and the Geiger counter clipped to his belt was already clicking ominously as they approached the containment area. Communications will be limited once you're inside, Korth explained through the suit radio. The radiation interferes with signals. I'll guide you through the shutdown sequence, but you'll be mostly on your own. The reactor chamber was a cathedral of alien engineering, all graceful curves and flowing lines that somehow contained the fury of a miniature sun. The radiation levels here would cook an unprotected human in minutes, but the damaged systems meant that those levels were climbing steadily toward catastrophic release. Marcus began the shutdown sequence, working through a checklist that Korth had simplified into basic human terms. Divert plasma flow here, lock down magnetic containment there, manually activate emergency cooling systems that should have triggered automatically. The Geiger counter's clicking accelerated to a steady buzz. Sweat ran down Marcus's face inside the helmet as he struggled with control interfaces designed for beings with 4 arms and completely different ideas about ergonomics. Primary containment holding, Korth's voice crackled through the static. Begin secondary plasma routing. Halfway through the sequence, one of the containment seals failed completely. Marcus watched through his helmet's faceplate as a stream of superheated plasma carved a glowing line across the chamber wall. The radiation spike nearly overloaded his suit's sensors. "Marcus, status report. Still alive," he managed, working to bypass the failed system. "But I'm going to need that luck, now." 9. The manual overrides were located in different parts of the chamber, forcing him to move through increasingly dangerous radiation fields. His suit's protection was degrading faster than expected, and he could feel the heat building inside the makeshift armor. But the work was oddly familiar. For 20 years, Marcus had been taking apart complex systems, learning how they worked, understanding the relationships between components. Now he was putting one back together under impossible circumstances. "Final containment lock in place," he reported. "Beginning cooling cycle activation." "Understood. You need to reach the manual control panel at the far end of the chamber." Marcus looked across 30 meters of space that glowed with residual radiation. His suit's power cells were failing, and the cooling system couldn't keep up with the heat. But the panel was right there, waiting for someone to throw the final switches that would save 47 lives. He ran. The final switches clicked into place just as his suit's life support gave out completely. Marcus collapsed next to the control panel, his Geiger counter screaming warnings that no longer mattered. Through his fading radio, he heard Korth confirming successful reactor shutdown and the beginning of emergency system rebuilding. He had done it. The families would live. Marcus woke up 3 days later in the medical bay of a Galactic Trade Authority hospital ship. His body felt like he had been hit by a cargo hauler, and his hair was falling out in clumps. But he was alive. Yuki sat beside his bed, reading a news tablet. "You made the galactic feeds," she said without looking up. "Human risks life to save alien refugees. The Trade Authority is calling it a humanitarian triumph. What about the families? Safe. The publicity from your stupid heroics got them fast-tracked for refugee status, plus emergency relocation assistance. They're being moved to a new colony world where they can rebuild their community properly." Marcus tried to sit up and immediately regretted it. The station? Salvage rights transferred to the Kathrani Refugee Assistance Fund, as requested. They're turning it into a memorial and research facility. Yuki finally looked at him. "You realize you gave up about 3 million credits to save people you'd known for 2 weeks? Worth every credit." A soft chime announced another visitor. Veltar entered with her characteristic grace. Though she moved carefully in the lower gravity of the human medical facility, she carried a small bundle wrapped in traditional Kathrani ceremony cloth. "The doctors say you will recover completely," she said, settling into a chair designed for human proportions with obvious discomfort. "Good to know. How are the families handling the relocation?" "With excitement and trepidation. It has been 60 years since we walked under a real sky." She unwrapped the bundle to reveal an intricately carved crystal that seemed to hold its own inner light. "This is a memory stone. It contains the stories of our people, including the story of the human who chose to build instead of destroy." Marcus accepted the stone carefully. It was warm to the touch and seemed to pulse gently with stored energy. "I can't read Kathrani. The stone will teach you, in time. But more importantly, it will remember you. When Senna's children ask about the guardian spirit who saved their grandparents, they will know your name and your choices." After Veltar left, Marcus lay in the medical bed, holding the memory stone and thinking about the future. His old life was gone completely now, burned away by radiation and poor decisions, and the simple choice to help strangers who needed help. But maybe that was okay. Maybe starting over meant more than just finding a new place to hide from your failures. Maybe it meant finding new ways to build something worth preserving. 6 months later, Marcus stood on the observation deck of the colony ship, Times New Horizon *, watching as humanity's newest deep space construction crew put the finishing touches on Keth Station 7's transformation. The memorial was beautiful in its simplicity, a fusion of human engineering efficiency and Kathrani aesthetic grace. The refugee families had settled well on their new world, a planet with floating islands that reminded them of their ancient home. But they had asked Marcus to oversee the station's conversion, claiming that no one understood its hidden spaces better than the human who had chosen to save it. Senna, now enrolled in a prestigious engineering program, worked alongside him as an apprentice. Her enthusiasm for human technology had evolved into a deep understanding of how different species could collaborate to achieve things neither could accomplish alone. "The dedication ceremony is next week," she said, joining him at the observation window. "The Trade Authority is sending a full diplomatic delegation. Think they'll remember to mention that it started with one guy trying to disappear? They will mention that it started with one human who saw a problem and chose to fix it," Senna corrected gently. "Which is the same thing. From a certain perspective," Marcus smiled. In the distance, ships from a dozen species approached the station for the ceremony. Their different designs reflecting different philosophies of engineering and exploration, but they were all coming to the same place. Drawn by a story that had somehow captured the imagination of half the galaxy. The story of a broken human who had learned to build something beautiful from the pieces of his shattered life. The story of families who had survived by preserving what mattered most in impossible circumstances. The story of cooperation triumphing over ancient hatred and fear. It was, Marcus reflected, a very human story, and he was proud to have helped write it. The memorial's dedication plaque, visible through the observation port, bore a simple inscription in both Standard and Kethrani script, in memory of those who chose to build bridges instead of walls, who saw strangers and chose to help, who proved that the best of humanity lies not in our individual strength, but in our willingness to use that strength in service of others. Below that, in smaller text, it added, "Sometimes the most important thing you can do is fix what seems irreparably broken." Marcus Chen, former salvager and current guardian of impossible things, found himself completely satisfied with that legacy.